LGBTQ. It is on the ballot. Very important issue, as many of the issues are these days. But we've reached a point in our society where we have never been before. The LGBTQ community and agenda has become beyond imagination for me. I don't understand how society has gotten so low and celebrated such disorder and such sin. But we're going to try to spend some time here in a series of talks with my good friend, Father Kirby, who is also one of our more prolific TAN authors, and talk about this crazy issue, try to bring some sense into something that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm kind of glad it doesn't make sense to me. And maybe there would be something wrong with me if it did. So, hey, good to see you, Father. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure. Good to be with you.
So, we got a number of very quick things we want to go through with this to try to help our viewers kind of understand this very complex issue, to understand it with truth, but also with charity. But I'd like to begin by positing a theory. I'd like to shoot something by you and see what you think. I'm asking myself, why has the LGBTQ community, and in particular, more recently, the transgender community, had what I consider almost a demonic kind of flair to it? And I mean that literally. You know, I see pictures of transgender men with almost demonic-like makeup, wearing horns on their heads, whether they're in like marches in San Francisco or even reading books to children in libraries at story time with these demonic-like horns. And I've seen the pictures. I've also seen in a lot of news reports where the satanic groups, the occult, which seems to be a growing religion, to an unusual extent, they're transgender people. So there's something that seems to be almost diabolical with this distortion of nature to a grotesque extent. And so here's my theory. The tradition holds that when Lucifer and his angels learned, or his demons, at the time they were angels, learned of the incarnation, they said, we cannot worship a God man. We can worship God, but we cannot worship a God man. That would be like humans being told they had to worship a slug, a drooling, snotty slug. And Lucifer said, forget it. I'm out of here. I will not worship this flesh. So then he goes to hell with his demons. And then he's resentful, just like anybody who's punished, just like a child who's punished. And sometimes, you know, if you discipline your child for being bad, sometimes they take on a very dark side and they say, I'll show you how bad I am. And here's the underlying theory. When they saw that flesh was being so elevated, so dignified, glorified with the incarnation, the devil revolted and said, let me show you how disgusting this flesh really is. So he takes the most intimate part of humanity, which is the sexual act between man and woman, the sacramental bond, and he distorts it. He becomes a lover, not of the natural, but of the unnatural. And he wants us humans, to see how disgusting this flesh is. And some people say that even the demons find the homosexual act disgusting. Not that they love it necessarily. They actually find it disgusting, but they want our sexuality to become disgusting because they see the flesh and all of humanity and God's creation as disgusting because they're so bitter and resentful of the incarnation. So, look, I may be stretching that, but that's sort of why I've been thinking that the transgender movement, particularly, which is such a distortion and a delusion of sexual identity, why it's such a target for Lucifer and his demons, more so than gluttony envy, sloth. It seems to be the target of the demon. So before we get into the other things, that's a heck of a way to start this conversation, Father. But I'm throwing it out there. What say you?
I think that summary there is consistent with part of our spiritual tradition. Saint Lucia of Fatima told us that the last battle will be for marriage and family, and by extension, we can say for human sexuality. So we know that the devil can do nothing good; he cannot create. The greatest power, the greatest damage he can do is manipulate or harm the good that God has created. And in particular, in areas of love and intimacy, of course, he would attack those. So that's not surprising. And of course, we see this throughout our spiritual tradition that, that the devil will, purposely prey on and provoke, lust and use of human sexuality in the body in ways that will cause harm to God. I mean, you can imagine the devil cannot harm God.
Right.
Is the creator and the living God. The devil is a creature. But what he can do is to see how much God loves each one of his children that he has created. And the devil is on a kamikaze mission to hurt, harm, or damn as many of God's children as possible, because that's the only way he can hurt God, is indirectly through his children.
Wow.
Well, that's not only
good.
just terribly, that's evil, but it just shows like this is a kamikaze mission. The devil knows he's lost. All he has is time, and he can manipulate the other gifts of God in order to do that. So I think when we approach the question of LGBTQ, we should realize that we're not just simply dealing with the body or our own souls. We're also dealing with a whole lot of supernatural and preternatural activity that is a part of this. And we shouldn't be afraid to name it. St. Paul tells us we do not fight against flesh and blood. He tells in his letter to the Ephesians, we fight against powers and principalities. It means there's something behind this, right? So when I find someone who's struggling with their sexuality or is deviant in their sexuality, I have to remind myself that person's a child of God, well beloved, who is ensnared and stuck in the forces and the influence of some pretty bad spirits. I fight those spirits. I want to denounce those spirits in order to bring that child of God back and help that child of God to understand how much they truly are loved and how they should order their lives according to God's moral truth.
Oh man, that's awesome. I love that. And all right, so help us then building on that. All right, so there is sin involved in this. We know that. We know that there's sin here. But, now it's become an age-old question already, I guess. When you have, whether it's homosexual inclinations or, you have this transgender thing in you, how do you know, and maybe you just don't, you just have to change action, but how do you know whether there is some kind of innate disorder that the person's born with, therefore they don't have personal culpability, or was it really, a result of their life and many decisions? So, on one hand, I don't want to be somebody that says, "Oh, they're just born that way." I mean, I sort of feel like that's a cop out. But on the other hand, I know that some people might have some kind of natural disposition towards that. And related to that, can demons kind of influence the way you're born, or only these, or so that can they influence the natural inclinations or unnatural inclinations, I guess you'd say, that you might have, or do they only kind of come into play as you start to make decisions based on your free will? Maybe they come into play when abusive people hurt young children, which impacts their identity. So how do you deal with both the sinful, the culpability, and then the lack of sin and lack of culpability? How do you deal with this in regards to LGBTQ?
So I may like to begin with the first part of your comments is that when it comes to the question of is a homosexual inclination or is a gender disassociation, is that nature or nurture? And the Catechism of the Catholic Church has no answer. It purposely avoids giving an opinion on this. And in many respects, in terms of our moral teaching, it doesn't really pertain, because whether it's nature or nurture, we know that we are defined by our actions. So we have to be very cautious in terms of what we're willing to consent to, what we're willing to do, what type of life we live. But let's just go back to this question, because this is the one we hear popularly in our culture, that they're born that way. Someone is born gay or born in the wrong gender, or various things of that sort. Well, let's just take that. And they say, well, look, if I'm born that way, then that's just the way it is, right? We've even heard in the political jargon, if God made me this way, then this must be the way I'm supposed to be. Wait a minute, let's back that up. First of all, we know that we live in a fallen world. Imagine if I were to tell a diabetic, hey, you were born that way, so you eat all the cake and sugar that you want. Or someone who's born with fetal alcohol syndrome. You know what? Go ahead and have a few beers. It's no big deal. You were born that way. It's okay. So we see throughout human life situations where the fallenness of creation is shown, that someone is born with a disorder. So in this case, when we speak about homosexuality, there's a disorder that a person is attracted to someone of the same gender, sexually attracted to someone of the same gender. That is a disorder. It's a disordered affection. I want to stress, the person is not disordered. They're a child of God, well beloved, but they have a disordered affection. If someone says, well, no, you can't say that. I was born this way. Well, yes, we can. And actually, again, we look at the rest of human life, we can see other occasions where someone is born a particular way in light of the fallenness of creation, and they have to deal with this particular disorder. Again, fetal alcohol syndrome or diabetes, whatever it might be. In this case, someone is given this disorder, and their task is to cooperate with grace and to order their affections, which have this disorder. Now, to what extent fallen spirits, the demons can influence this? Certainly. I mean, we know the world, the flesh, and the devil. Like, they can tempt someone, they can give someone pictures or images, they can allow their eyes to see things, they can entice them, and so on. Certainly. We know that fallen spirits cannot read our minds. They don't know our hearts. And so oftentimes they will discern based on reactions or on our actions to certain things. So if we attempt to order our lives according to the gospel, all of us, regardless of what struggles or difficulties we have, and those who struggle with homosexual attraction or with the gender disassociation, they have to realize that's a disorder. Now, Connor, let me tell you, it is a severe offense and a harm against charity when someone, especially Christians, say to someone, it's okay for you to be that way. Right. Because they don't want to speak the truth. They don't want to call the person to a greater way of life, a more excellent way of love, and they just accept the person. It's okay. So that would be like me saying to someone who has coronavirus, it's okay for you to just sit there and suffer. You don't have to take the vaccine. You don't have to change your way of life. You don't have to just continue to suffer, and that's okay. And then what happens when we do that, especially as a culture, and when we formalize it in laws, like with gay marriage and so on, we begin to perpetuate the harm and the difficulty to marriage, sexuality, to the person's dignity, to their well-being. Yeah. So we shouldn't be surprised that we see the consequences and how this begins to spiral. It begins with the gay movement, then it becomes the transgender movement, and now we have this Q movement. It's like, what's Q? Because they don't know. Right? So you can just see how this is really beginning to just fragment in many ways. And what happens is the children of God begin to live in confusion, and they don't know that they're loved, and they're away from the path that brings happiness.
I think part of the issue of, for me, that kind of goes onto the ballot is the radical left is trying to normalize this community, the LGBTQ community, to where our children will think of these things as, two daddies or a man that dresses up as a woman as natural, as just normal, like you were saying. Oh, you're just born that way, and I think that I think the radical left has this as an agenda to make the unnatural look natural. So,
Connor, if I can point out just something you said just there, to show you the power of their language. You probably just used the term and didn't even think twice about it because it's everywhere. You mentioned the LGBTQ community. Yeah. And I argue, I say, no, I call it the LGBTQ movement.
Good. That's good. That's good. I like it.
It's not a community, but to your point, they're relativizing it and desensitizing it. This is community. This is a different version of family. But you see how powerful the language is.
I'll give you an example of the language. So, in North Carolina here, as you know, we had the famous bathroom bill, and to where we were trying to say that, the conservatives were fighting to say, no, a man cannot use a female bathroom. Um, you know, I'm very proud of the politicians who fought for that on the right side, but it would have been more effective if we called it the shower bill, because actually the law that the left was trying to push were giving rights not just for a man to use a female's bathroom in isolation. It would actually allow a man to go shower in a little girl's locker room at the YMCA. Okay, so that jars you much more than just using a bathroom in the stall. So if it was so if the right would have renamed it and fought over those semantics and say, no, this is a shower bill, not just a bathroom. So I think the left, Father, has outsmarted us a lot on semantics. Just like you were saying, they use community or they use bathroom. Going to the bathroom is so innocent. It's so innocent, right? So I think that happens. So let me ask you this. It seems to me that the Catholic Church has taught, and I know that the Catechism talks about how sexuality affects all aspects of the human person in both body and soul. So a little bit more theological here. Does the soul have a gender? I mean, yeah, I know you can't think of the soul completely separate from the body, but you know, every heresy has a little bit of truth in it. So, these transgenders that sort of say, okay, my body's this way, but my soul or my identity or my mind or whatever metaphysical thing they're saying is of the different sex. Is there, but there could be some truth in that not that God created the wrong soul for the wrong body, but that their soul actually sort of does have a gender. But does it? How do you think through that? How do you talk about gender or sex for a soul?
Yeah, so when we speak about our human personhood, we know we're bodies and souls, and our souls does take on a certain identity from our bodies. It is this intimate union. Our bodies are not mistakes or accidents or just raw material, as some people think. No, our body is just as much a part of our personhood as our soul is. So our soul takes on this identity. And so we can speak about a feminine genius or a masculine genius, which is a real identity of the soul. It means that the soul will react a certain ways because it's of a masculine person or of a feminine person. So it is appropriate to speak in these terms. I'll tell you, in terms of the transgender, when someone is struggling with disassociation, that is a very serious disorder that has to be addressed, because that means that someone feels as if they are truly a stranger to themselves, that they are not in or are the person that they are meant to be, that there's a mistake or that there's some type of, again, this disassociation. I'm not who I am supposed
Yeah.
to be, and fundamentally in terms of which transgenderism, it becomes very much an attack on the body. Now, here's one thing that I think we give a lot of leeway to the transgender movement. I think we need to start pushing back. Actually, it's very much related to what you were just asking about the soul. If there's a man who thinks that he is a woman, and he can argue, I am in the wrong body, I am a woman, we cede the spiritual argument too early, because we need to push back and say, actually, you're not a woman, you're a man. You don't know what it's like to be a
Hmm.
woman.
Hmm.
So they are projecting what they think femininity is, what they think a woman is that I'm supposed to be a woman. How can you say that? You are not a woman. You
Right.
don't know.
How
Right?
yeah? How
Which
do
is
you
what,
know that chocolate ice cream is your favorite flavor if you've never tasted it? And you can't
right.
taste
So you just
femininity. You can't taste it because you're not a woman. That's good.
and your only argument is you don't like
Right.
strawberry,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I don't like strawberries, so I must like
Right.
chocolate better, right? So for a man to say I'm not really a man, I'm a woman, but they can't say that. That just shows the depth of the disorder there, this gender disassociation, that they're beginning to think something. This, why, by the way, Connor, is why there is a vastly high
Mm-hmm.
suicide rate among those who've gone through the surgeries in order to change their gender, because they change the gender, they think that's going to be the problem, that's going to solve the problem, that's going to make everything better. They change their gender and they say, I'm more miserable and more disassociated now than I ever was
Yeah.
before. And many of them give into despair and they take their
Yeah.
lives. This is why, as Christians, we the battle we wage is because we understand the dignity of every human being, the value of human sexuality and the body, this really is a battle of charity, of love. Like, we really care about our neighbor. Someone could say to us, why do you care if these people are gay? Why do you care if these people are transgender? Because we follow the principle of the Good
Mm.
Samaritan. As Christians, we care for our neighbor. And we know what human life is. We know what a good anthropology is as Christians and as people of
Yeah.
goodwill. And we care about our neighbors and we want the best for them. This is why we continue to engage these arguments.
So I meant to look it up before this show here, but some the was it the Psychological Association of America, or something like that, removed transgenderism from the list of disabilities or disorders, and
Yeah.
it's now celebrated as an act of courage. And so whoever did that should be guilty of malpractice, in my opinion. But they have literally removed it from the canon of disorders. And you've seen very, very sick people who you just have to feel sorry for. These people that desire to cut limbs off their body, like people that want to cut their legs off or their arms off. I mean, there are those people out there. It's clearly a disorder. And yet, if somebody wants to do that and have a sex change, they're celebrated. I mean, what if that same person, what family member would support them when they say, "I just really want to cut my leg off. I mean, I just want this leg gone." And you would do everything you can medically to help this person. They need counseling, they need therapy, or an exorcism. I don't know, or both. But sex changes are celebrated. And now they want the federal government to pay for prisoners or people in the military to have sex change. This is insanity. And so I don't know how the medical profession, psychological, and the surgeons, where do they get off doing this?
Yes, yes. Well, and that manual that you're describing is called the DSM. And right now, I think we're on the DSM 5. And just to give you an example, not simply was transgenderism removed, but up until DSM 3, homosexual attraction was acknowledged as a psychological
Yeah.
disorder. It's interesting, if you go back to DSM 3, and this is the manual that describes all the disorders for those in the therapeutic profession. And if you go to DSM 3 and you look, you see the summary: narcissism, catastrophic thinking, suicidal tendencies, so on. You see what was acknowledged in terms of homosexual attraction of people, what they would
Yeah.
suffer. That didn't change just
Right.
because the DSM was changed, right? And to me, and for all of us as Christians, like, this is very much like we have no axe to grind. Like, this isn't some power play for us. We're not trying to control other people's lives. We genuinely care about other people. We want them to be happy, and we can look and say, this is not going to make you happy. And if you try to impose this upon us all through law, it's going to make our society unhappy, and we can't let you do that.
So I know that one of the Supreme Court cases recently has interpreted sex discrimination as you can define yourself whatever sex you want to, and me as an employer, I can't discriminate against you based on anything having to do with your interpretation of sexual identity. It's one thing to say I can't discriminate against a man or a woman. I understand that, but I can't discriminate against a transgender or a homosexual. It's crazy. And so Ruth Bader Ginsburg just passed away. God rest her soul. And Trump will be trying to replace her. So this is an example of, a lot of people might wonder, well, how is LGBTQ things on the ballot? And whether you're talking about a bathroom bill or whether you're talking about discrimination, employment laws, these things have a substantial impact at the ballot box. Whether you're talking about a Supreme Court appointment or whether you're talking about federal laws. But these states who are grappling with bathroom bills, with discrimination laws, all kinds of things. Can an elementary school teacher, a third grade, be a transgender? I mean, this stuff is all coming. Can parents give their children hormones to start changing their sex? I mean, that's abuse. That's just abuse. So, but state laws are going to be grappling with this, and those state laws are going to end up at the Supreme Court being reviewed for constitutionality. I mean, children have constitutional rights as much as adults do. So I just see, especially the Supreme Court nominations, as a huge area where the morality is really at the ballot box, and I'm afraid that the left and the Democratic Party, frankly, they do everything they can to appoint federal judges, especially Supreme Court judges, but not just Supreme. All these, smaller federal courts, district courts, and appellate courts. The people appointed by Obama and Clinton through their judicial activism are absolutely beyond doubt pushing this LGBTQ ideology through to the entire nation, and I think that is catastrophic. So I just think Catholics need to understand that you don't just get to say whether you like the personality of Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. Which one, which guy would you rather have dinner with? Which one guy seems nicer? These judicial appointments are a big deal, and it has direct impact on whether a parent can give hormones to their third grader, as one example. So I mean, I'm rambling there, Father, but I see that as a
No,
very important thing in this coming election.
yes, and we can answer it. If someone to say, well, where are we going to see this, or where are the hot spots? Well, everywhere, or it could be everywhere. And once you establish and you open up that door in terms of the power of language and control in terms of gender, it reaches everywhere. So you described it. It's prison policy, it's our military, it's education, it's the rights of parents. It's, I mean, keep going. Even churches. I mean, at some point, like, are we going to be put under hate laws if we preach against transgenderism or against homosexuality? I mean, where does this stop? And of course, with the wrong administration, with the people who despise the church or organized religion, or who hate truth, or do not allow for an authentic diversity of opinions in a democratic republic, then we're going to be in some
Yeah.
trouble. So I think that it's very important that we're attentive to these issues, and they're across the
Yeah.
board. Like, pick your poison. So I think we have to be very attentive as believers, as people of goodwill, and as responsible citizens.
So to kind of, we've talked about some tough subjects. So let's kind of turn a little bit to this issue of the way it's meant to be. We've talked about kind of how wrong things are, but the complementary nature of man and woman. I believe it's the Catechism that talks about the complementarity of male and female. Um, and it seems like that's just been thrown by the wayside. The marital act has two ends. A unitive and a procreative purpose. So, if you could talk a little bit about the complementary nature of man and woman, physically and non-physically, emotionally, psychologically, whatever. It's not just a physical thing. Um, but then also, I'm wondering if you can touch on, everyone knows obviously that a man and a man cannot procreate, so they can't meet that second component to the ends of the conjugal act. But can a man and a man have unity? I think a lot of people would say that while they can't procreate, obviously, they can have this wonderful love between each other, kind of that first component of the conjugal act. So, can you talk about that? Because to me, it seems that they can't even have that true love because they can't have the spiritual, psychological, emotional, or of course physical complementarity that God's natural law, provides for the rest of us.
Yes, I'm glad, and of course we're speaking to believers, so I'll give some biblical examples. But I would argue that if we were speaking in a pluralistic environment, we could just as well use philosophical arguments to make these same points. But I think it's very powerful. If you go to Genesis chapter 2, it's great because when you see when God created Adam, he took a rib from Adam's side in order to create
Hmm.
Eve, right? So beautiful
Yeah.
creation. And from our perspective, we can look at this and say, oh, well, it's a rib and so on. But, comparatively, in terms of the myths of the ancient world, The woman would have been taken from the man's foot, or even from feces and various
Wow.
things. So the woman was considered very much below, or secondary, or not even an equal
Wow.
person. But in the creation account, it's Adam's rib. It means someone who is a companion next to him and close to
Close to
his
his heart.
heart.
That's neat. Wow.
Very much. So you see, even in Israel, that there's this beginning of this equality. Of course, later in our Lord's public ministry, generations later in salvation history, the Lord will appeal to this in order to correct Moses in terms of divorce. But here we see that the two become one. And Adam, he had all these animals and he had all creation at his disposal. When he sees Eve, that joy is very much what we're talking about in terms of complementarity. That Adam looks and says, finally, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Like, this is someone like me. This is an equal. And we're told that the two
Yeah.
become one. Now, that's not simply of the body, that happens of the soul. Remember that rib, that closeness to the heart, that companionship, and so that complementarity is so important. And it is unique between man and woman. I think it's interesting that if we go later in the scriptures, when people look at the friendship between David and Jonathan, and people try to
Yeah.
turn it into this homoerotic thing, which is completely
Yeah.
misplaced. It's interesting that as much as they talk about David and Jonathan, they don't compare it to when David speaks about Abigail, his favorite wife. When he talks about Abigail, he is just over the top, because it's a different love. There's a romantic component. There's a union that no man can give to another man, or no woman can give to another woman. So we see, even compare, contrast in the biblical narrative, the difference here. Now, with that said, I will say that I think that the fact that our culture has diminished the friendship that could be offered between two men or between two women, which is beneath the matrimonial friendship. But I think the fact that we have basically depleted any other friendship is one of the reasons why I would argue I think homosexuality has become so popular in our culture, because men feel like they can't be a friend with another
Right.
man, or a woman to another woman, or we have forgotten what that looks like. It's interesting that biblically, friendship was considered as almost an extension of family life. If someone was your friend, they ate with you, they were a part of your family. And I think we've turned friendship a lot into more of a commodity. I'm bored, who's available, or what are you up to, or something. We've turned it more into a commodity as opposed to a real extended
Yeah,
relationship.
I'm
So
watching Ken Burns' documentary on the Civil War, and it's all these old pictures of the guys sitting around camp, and a lot of times they're hanging on each other. They got their arms around each other. I mean, they're kind of chilled out, or they're kind of laying on the ground, kind of near each other. And I think the modern world would just look at it, oh well, they must have been homosexual, and but they had a familiarity with each other and a friendship, because they weren't as concerned with that. I'm not saying homosexuality hadn't always been here. I know it has, but yeah, men have kind of almost lost the ability to be almost familiarly affectionate with one another because of this concern of looking gay. Yeah, I've
yes.
I've noticed that. But I was thinking about that very point watching Ken Burns, old black and white videos of the Civil War. So
Or even to give you a more contemporary example, I studied, went to seminary in Rome, and in Italy, well, of course, homosexuality is there. It's not as celebrated or accepted culturally because of the strong emphasis on family in Italian culture and many Mediterranean cultures. And so when you go there, the men that you were describing with this documentary, the men in Italy are very affectionate. They lock arms, they hang on each other, and so on. Things that as an American in our culture, witnessing would make me very
yeah,
uncomfortable.
yeah,
Is everyone in this
right,
country gay? What I mean? Like, and then just to realize this: if you live in a culture where homosexuality is not popularly accepted, men feel comfortable, women feel comfortable expressing greater affection to other men or
yeah,
to other women.
yeah.
I think we've lost that. We've taken that from our society, and I think it's a loss for people in terms of good and
Well,
healthy
even
friendships.
even Da Vinci's Last Supper, John, the beloved disciple, right, laying on Christ, and of people have tried
Yeah.
to distort that too, which is just so. Well, look, in wrapping up, I mean that's some awesome stuff, Father. And wrapping up, all right, election coming November 3rd. What would you say? Two things. What would you say to the voter? Um, as they're kind of preparing for this, what would you say to the person, like myself, who has a relative who is going to vote for Joe Biden. They're a good person, but they're obviously missing something in my estimation. And then what would you also say to to somebody who has a loved one who is stuck in this LGBTQ movement? So what do you say about the upcoming election? What do you say about many of the viewers here have family or friends who are going to vote for Biden and Harris and that agenda that comes with it? And then what do you say to somebody who taking the election off the table? What do you say to somebody who has a loved one who's struggling with these issues? So we'll wrap up like that.
Yes, I think with the first question, I think that the greatest gift that any person of goodwill can get to themselves is a well-formed conscience, and our consciences are formed on truth, not popular opinion, not cultural trends. So I think that it's so important that we truly form our consciences. When we do that, it becomes very clear in terms of how a person of virtue and goodwill must vote. So I want to just say that first part is properly form your conscience. Secondly, I would say in terms of the person who has a family member who's struggling with homosexuality or who's in a gay relationship or who's transgender, I would say the greatest thing we can do is to overwhelm the other person with kindness and love, because they are told that we are intolerant, that we are, homophobic, that we hate them, that, we only wish harm to them, we want to control them, and so on. We're fascists. I think the greatest thing we can do is counter that by saying, no, like, we love you, we care about you, we respect you, like, we will defend you if anyone tries to hurt you. No, like, we are telling you this in love. And rather than that false tolerance we hear about that's very intolerant, I think that we can just overwhelm with love and kindness, because the arguments will come secondary. I think first we have to really challenge the false narrative that we are cruel or unaccepting or unloving. So I just say overwhelm the person with kindness and love. And then, please God, the heart will open, and then we begin to present some counter arguments.
No, that's great stuff. Thank you. This is something that I know it's been a favorite topic of people to kind of talk about, and it's weird, and there's gross factors to it. So I know it comes up, but I think the way you present these things, Father, you kind of present that truth, but you're always emphasizing our roles as Christians and with charity. No matter how weird this world gets, we have to respond with truth and charity. And I think most people emphasize one over the other and fail to remember that they're two sides of the same coin. I think you do an awesome job at that. So thanks for being here and talking with us today. All right. So God bless you, Father, and we'll have another one of these on another topic very soon.
Sounds good. Take care.
All right. See you.
Take care.